Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited to be here as usual. I'll say 1 minute just about the situation in Israel because I've been getting a lot of questions and a lot of texts from people. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for their concern and tefillot. It's really so nice to have so many people care and make sure everything's okay. And what I tell my family and friends and everyone that is that, as we all know, when you go to Israel, you feel one way, and when you're not in Israel, you feel another way, because all you have when you're not in Israel is the newspaper and Instagram and texts and videos. So it like seems scary and horrible. And then when you're living in the country, living your regular life. So everyone's experience, even in Israel, it really depends what city you're in. Some cities have it worse, some cities have it better. I live in Yom Shalom, and thank God it's pretty quiet here, going about my usual day. I don't know so much more than you in terms of inside information, because I read the news to find out, speak to people, but really I want to thank everyone for their care and tefillot, and I continue doing the same. So that's about that. I don't really have much more to add about the situation. The topic today that I'm going to talk about is something we've all heard of. I don't ever think in this way, unless you've read the book that I read on it, which I'm going to say in a minute what it is. And it's a topic that I never get tired of hearing of, because it's just so amazing and it's so inspiring to learn about. And I mentioned earlier that I didn't plan this class after the rockets. I planned this class before the rockets started, and then I said, oh, it's so perfect because people need a boost. And this is exactly what the class is going to be. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Let me just open up. Okay. Okay, so here is a picture of Yom Yerushalayim. It's not from from a few days ago. It's from a different year. And we see people parading in the streets, really, really happy. And now I'm going to share a few things that is generally known about Yom Yerushalayim. What Yom Yerushalayim celebrates is the reunification of the city. In the 6-Day War, we got control of the old city, and now the whole Yerushalayim is under our control once again. And we're thrilled about that, because now we can go to Arab Pact, we can go to the Kotel, and it's a day to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that amazing miracle. So that's what Yom Yerushalayim is about. And something else people are familiar with the 6-Day War. One, that it was won in 6 days. And people are also familiar with the fact that one of the greatest miracles was the first day of the war, where the Israeli Air Force basically bombed all the planes of the enemies. And with the Israelis controlling the sky, the war was pretty much in their hands. So those are the basic facts that people know. But what I want to focus on this class is the details behind the miracles, because yes, that in itself is amazing. But when you learn about what else happened that made so many things happen to work perfectly, it really blows your mind. And I reread it every year and learn about it every year, because it's just a fantastic, fantastic story. So we're going to focus on 3 things. 1, what events led up to the 6-Day War? 2, what are the fine details behind Operation Moked? Operation Moked is the operation where the Israeli Air Force got rid of all the planes of the enemies. So the behind the scenes of this operation is absolutely incredible. And the 3rd is, how can we thank God for these miracles? So the book that I read, and I highly, highly recommend this, is called, it's pretty small. This is how thick it is, very small. It's called Megillat Sheshet Hayamim, the 6-Day War Scroll. It was written by Dr. Chagi Ben Artzi, who is a lecturer, very, very educated about everything. And he wrote about the 6-Day War. And everything I'm about to share, a lot of it is direct quotes from his book. And this is where I got the information. So the first thing I want to ask is what led up to the war. Right, picture here is the famous 1948 Declaration of the State of Israel. Now, the Arabs refused to accept the State of Israel. Israel's declared, they're not accepting it. And in the meantime, what are they doing? They're piling up their weapons, because they say, you think you're a state, we don't really think you're a state. And then we had the Independence Day War. But even after it was over, the Arabs were never, till today, they don't say, okay, you have a state, let's live in peace. They still want to annihilate us. And something else that was done in 1964, there was an organization called the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. What this organization did is they did a lot of acts of sabotage and terrorism. So anyone engaging in these kind of things, you're headed towards war. Other factors which led to the Six-Day War. In 1964, Israel built this national water carrier. They wanted to get water from up north by the Jordan River, the Kinneret, all the way down south where there's no real sources, where it's very dry. And Syria didn't like that. They said, we don't want you to take water and bring it down south. So there was heavy shelling on the communities living up north. And they decided they want to divert the water. They want the country to dry up. Now, the water that Israel is taking, it doesn't belong to Syria. It's already in agreement, it's Israel's, but Syria doesn't really care about that. And they begin putting pressure up north on Israel. And then something begins called the water war, Milchemet Hamayim, Milchama al Hamayim, because of this issue. And what happens is Egypt sees that their friends up in Syria are having skirmishes with the Israelis. So they say, you know what? Let's come help you. We'll make a pact. We'll come to your aid. And what Egypt does, so here's Egypt over here. They move troops into the Sinai Peninsula. I want to pause for a minute and tell you a very important historical fact. In 1957, there was a war. And in this war, Israel conquered the Sinai Peninsula. So if we go back, this whole area, which is 3 times the size of Israel, Israel conquered. And then they withdrew and they gave it to the Egyptians. Why? Why conquer something and then give away what you conquered? Because Egypt promised, if you withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, it will be a zone war-free, demilitarized, will leave the Red Sea open, Israeli ships could free slowly to Eilat. And now all of a sudden they're moving troops in the area where they said they wouldn't. They broke their promise. They kicked out the UN peacekeeping force that was in the Sinai Peninsula. And they also decided, let's block the Straits of Tiran over here. And if this area that's circled is blocked, the Israeli ships can't travel freely over here. And that's essentially a declaration of war. So we have all these factors. Now, Israel turns to other countries for help. They turn to the United States because all of the countries, they knew what was going on. And they all promised that if Egypt breaks its agreement, we will come and help. And Israel asked for help. And it was clear that the world was going to do nothing. Nobody was coming to Israel's aid. Israel is all on its own. And now Egypt sees, hey, we could do whatever we want because no one's coming to help Israel. And when they see that no one is coming to Israel's aid, they sense the time has come to fulfill their age-old dream to wipe Israel off the map. They said Israel has no friends, no one's helping them. Let's go all the way. And Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, they all form a military pact. All these Arab countries, let's get together and destroy Israel. And just to give you a sense of some things they were saying back then, and they were not beating around the bush, they were not hiding, they outright said what they wanted to do. So here's an example from a broadcast in Cairo. The president declares that our aim is to gain control over Israel and we have a plan to liberate Palestine. 100 million fighters will destroy you. Be prepared because 100 million Arabs will dig your graves. Outright saying, we want to destroy you. In Damascus, what did the radio say? We will overrun you, Zionists. There will be no peace, no security, no freedom until we have thrown you into the sea. Outright, this is what we want to do to you. And Israel is hearing this. And there's a lot of anxiety for the 3 weeks that this is going on from Independence Day, where they first moved troops in, and the threat is building. The threat is looming. There's a sense of isolation and fear. The memories of the Holocaust were still fresh. In fact, the Israelis, they dug tons of graves in parks because they got the cemeteries ready. They said, if we go to war, there's going to be so many people dying, there's not going to be enough graves. So they started digging graves. And they're recruiting their reservists. The Jews outside of Israel, like you guys always do and are doing today, gather to pray for Israel's survival. Everyone is really, really nervous. And then something really amazing happens. 1 second, just need to move that picture to the side of the screen. Israel creates a national emergency unity government, which is amazing because, not that Israel was a country for so long, it's not so many years, but in one of my classes, I mentioned that in 1948, when Ben-Gurion was declaring the state, they had a temporary government and they had different parties. there were only 600,000 Jews, and there were 13 different parties to represent them. Now, there's millions of Jews in Israel. I don't know even how many parties there are, because every election is new created. But Israel always had its various opinions, and the fact that everyone is gathering together now and saying this is an emergency, we need to unify. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks down at unity very favorably, and that's what Israel decides to do. And they said, we need to strike first, we need to attack, we can't sit and wait to be attacked. And on June 5th, 1967, 7:15 a.m., they decide to launch a preemptive strike called Operation Moked, or Focus in English. So we spoke about what led up to the war. Now, Operation Moked, what are the details behind it? And this is the real amazing story, which I wonder why I never learned in school. But I don't know if I learned about this war in school either. So 200 planes set off to attack the Egyptian planes and airfields. And it's really smart, because if you attack the airfields, then the planes can't fly off. So essentially, the planes are ineffective. And now let's talk about the risks for a minute. Egypt has a well-developed advanced anti-aircraft system. The Israelis, on the other hand, don't have anything advanced. They have old French planes. Israel, of course, is greatly outnumbered, but they said, we don't have any other choice. This is what we need to do. And the miracle, in one slide, all the planes reached the Egyptian airfield without one being detected. They flew pretty low, but they still could be detected by the anti-aircraft system. But for whatever reason, which we will discuss, the advanced Egyptian anti-aircraft system did not function. It didn't register the planes. And within 1 hour, the planes bombed the runways and 200 Egyptian planes. And it went so well that they said, let's do a second wave. And at 9:45, they do a second wave. And it's even crazier, because Egypt knows what's happening. They know they were attacked, and they start shelling Israel. Their anti-aircraft system is working now, and Israel's under heavy fire. And even under heavy fire, only one Israeli plane is hit, and Israel bombs another 100 planes. And then it gets even better. That what happens now, the Arabs like saying, we're winning, we're amazing. So they start bragging about their victories. Now, they're not victorious, they're losing, but they say that they're winning. And Egypt's allies hear this, and they say, hey, if Egypt is doing this well against Israel, we also want a piece of the game. We want to get in on the action. And Israel really wasn't losing. Israel really was winning. So Israel was ready for them, and they attacked their planes and destroyed more than 100 Syrian and Jordanian planes. And essentially, Israel is the king of the sky. And in 6 hours, the war is essentially won, because if you control the air, you basically control the war. So this was all happened in 6 days. Amazing, huge, huge miracle. But it gets much better. And now this is the story I want to share that I learned in the book, which is not often told. The question I want to ask is, where does the intelligence and bravery of the IDF and IAF, Israeli Air Force, end, and divine providence begin? Because we know, especially in a country that it has the direct eyes of God. We have in Sefer Devarim, Tamid Ene Hashem Elokecha Ba, God is always looking at Eretz Yisrael, and we know Hashem's Hashgacha on Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael is extremely strong. Nothing here is happening without God's knowledge, involvement. So where was God's involvement in all of this? So now we're going to talk about the amazing coincidences that nobody could have ever planned for, and Israeli intelligence, as great as it is, had no way of ever knowing. The first, there was this VIP tour above the Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptian president and war minister decide that they want to go and visit the soldiers that are stationed along the border. We spoke about how there's Egyptian soldiers along the Israel-Sinai border that aren't allowed to be there, but are, because they kicked out the UN. So the war minister decided, let me go and visit them. I'll boost their morale. And he also invites a special delegation from the Iraqi army. Let's go, all these important people. They'll be so happy to see us. And he also gives a very important command. He says, my plane is going to be up in the air, and I don't want anyone accidentally to shoot us. So he tells all the anti-aircraft units, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., when my plane is going to be up in the air, the special VIP plane, no one is allowed to shoot. And he says, if any shooting needs to be done, I need to personally approve it. Okay, so that's what he says. Now, one of the results of that, so you probably already begin to connect the dots. The Egyptian anti-aircraft people, they're relaxed. A lot of people say, okay, so from 7 to 8, if we can't shoot anyway, let's just go to breakfast, let's go relax. So they're not really on high alert. And then when they finally do realize what's happening, they can't shoot because the commander is up there in the air and the commander said nobody is allowed to shoot. So that's why their anti-aircraft system didn't work. Not that it was faulty. They had a command from this commander who's in the air not to shoot. So they're sitting and watching and they can't do anything. And once they realize what's happening, that it's Israeli planes coming, it was too late to do anything. So, and Israel intelligence, they knew nothing about this VIP tour. They happened to say, we're gonna 7:15, 7:45, we're gonna start this operation. And the tour happened to go up at the same time. Israeli intelligence had no way about this happening. It worked out for them. And this is also a really fun detail. When the Israeli military is in the sky, they see this VIP plane in the air and they want to shoot it, except their commanders say, you're not allowed to shoot, there might be civilians aboard. Meanwhile, there were no civilians. It was all the top Israeli, top enemy Air Force commanders aboard, which would have been amazing to get them. However, don't feel too bad about the fact that we couldn't shoot them because they were all either jailed or demoted, because what an embarrassment that Israel could come and do such an attack like this. And they're all in the sky on their fancy plane ride and nothing was done. So this was miracle number one. And if this was all that happened, Dayenu, I think that in itself is super incredible. But there's more. Amazing story number two. The Egyptians, they were in the habit of taking these short flights over the shores of the Sinai with the new planes. They wanted to test them out. They wanted to scope the land. The Egyptians also had a feeling that if there would be an Israeli attack, it would be in the morning. So every morning from 4:30 to 8:30, they would go on this tour. And that morning, for whatever reason, the takeoff that occurred, I guess it wasn't from 4:30, the takeoff was at 7:30. The takeoff is delayed. And the deputy commander, who everyone's waiting for, he says, I'm so sorry, I left home late, I'm on my way to the plane, we could take off right away. They weren't able to take off in the end because by then there was nowhere to go, everything was bombed. But why was he late? The evening before, the commander-in-chief of the Air Force decides, I want to hold a dance party for my pilots, I want to raise their morale. Also, we know we're going to win this war, let's have a lot of fun. And he holds a dance party in one of the airfields. And he invites, and there's food, drinks, belly dancers, and this early party celebrating, which they're not even victorious yet. It went on till the early hours in the morning. So the deputy chief, he sleeps late. And he sleeps late because he had a late night. And then he comes late to this takeoff, and it doesn't happen because he was so late. And Israeli pilots, they're tense, preparing for war. The Egyptians are dancing the night away. So it's no surprise they were late for their morning flight. And this is miracle number two, that this flight didn't go off either because of somebody sleeping late, which also kind of reminds me of Achashverosh, when in an opposite way, that he couldn't sleep. But also we see God intervening over here. And now for amazing story number 3. The Jordanians, who are allies with the Egyptians, they have a brand new radar base. And their advanced radar base is able to detect enemy planes. And at 7:20 a.m., dozens of minute dots fill the Jordanian radar screens. And they realize these are Israeli planes. So right away, they transfer the code to the Egyptians. And the code word was anab, meaning grape. And the code word, the Israelis are attacking, do something back. So he tries the code word and there's no response. So he tries again, anab, desperately trying to get the code across. And the Egyptians can't decipher the code. And they get so frustrated that they can't decipher that they just cut off communication with the Jordanians. And the Jordanian warning is not received. They saw the Israeli planes coming. They gave a warning, but the Egyptians couldn't decipher the code and the Israeli attack succeeded. Now, why couldn't they decipher the code? The reason why is because that very morning, the code word was changed and the word anab was no longer valid. And the Egyptians from midnight were already using the new code word. So when they're getting the old code word, they can't decipher it. And the Jordanian supervisor used the wrong code. And when the Egyptian realized, hey, maybe this was the old code, it was too late. And this is something the Israeli intelligence could not have foreseen. No one knew it was going to happen. And it's another incredible miracle that also happened at the same exact time and allowed the Israelis to be successful. So to summarize what we have, 7:30 a.m., we had the VIP flight. No one is allowed to shoot. 7:30 a.m., the casual air flight is delayed because the commander overslept because he was busy dancing the night away. And at 7:30 a.m., the warning was transmitted with the wrong code. And the Jordanians didn't get the warning about what was happening. So that is what I call divine providence at its finest. The Am Yisrael did its part. They put everything on the line. They unified and they went out to attack. And they had no idea that all these things would happen. And God did his part and had all of these things happen at the same time. And Israel had a stunning, amazing, amazing victory. Now, in Sefer Shemuel, one of the Pesukim there is V'yedeu kol ha'kahal hazeh ki lo b'cherev u'v'chanit yoshi Adonai ki l'Adonai ha'malchama. That God does not need swords to win. He controls the war. And we see here how God controls the war. And I think learning these behind the scenes stories, first of all, learning about God's miracles is always amazing. And especially this, because you could plan and plan that you oversleep or use the wrong code word and it all goes out the window and none of it matters anymore. And look how amazing that and it gives me so much hope. Well, first of all, reading Tanakh gives me hope, and stories like this as well, because now if I connect it to modern day, it's scary what's going on, all these rackets, all these Arabs. But let's remember, we have God on our side, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the best general there is, and he effortlessly could make these small things happen that they can make such a huge difference. So I think when we really remember God is running the show, he is controlling the world, it really makes a difference and helps us appreciate more. Another thing is Ezra Weitzman, who is the head of the Israeli Air Force and operations during the war. They asked him, please explain the astounding success of the Air Force on the first day. And he couldn't explain it. And as we learned, how could you explain why that they didn't know all this behind the scenes stuff? Now we know it. And all he could think of to Etzba Elohim He, which is what the Chadmim tell Paro and Mekat Kinim, when they can't do it, they say it's the finger of God. This is what the commander says. I don't have any other explanation. It's God's hand, and learning these stories helps us appreciate that it's God's hand. Two other things I want to share, which is really nice. Naomi Shemed, she came right before the 6-Day War, and one of the lines she had in it was Ha'ir Asher Badad Yoshevet Uveliva Choma, the city that's sitting alone and has a wall in it. The wall is not referring to the Kotel, it's referring to the literal wall that divided East and West Jerusalem. East Jerusalem where the Jordanians are, and West where the Israelis are. And she said we can't go to all the things we can't do because of the divided city. It was a prophetic song. Then we have the 6-Day War, where when we didn't even talk about today conquering Jerusalem. That happened later on in the war. We were just focusing on one operation on the first day of the war. And then she changed the song in light of what happened. Another thing I want to share, which is also very prophetic, that I've shared in other classes, Rav Kook's son, Chacham Tzvi Yehuda Kohen Kook, on Independence Day, he was talking to the students in his yeshiva Merkaz Harav. And all of a sudden, he gets up and he tells them, Efo Chevron Shelanu, Efo Shechem Shelanu, Efo Yericho Shelanu. He starts naming all the cities that we don't have under our control. He had no idea the 6-Day War would happen and we would get control over it. But what he was sharing with them is, we can't be, yes, of course, thank God for what we have and be happy for what we have, but know that we have a higher, bigger goal. And a lot of his students ended up fighting in the war, and they were a bunch of the people that fought in the Tzanchanim in Yerushalayim. And also looking back, it was amazing that he's asking where are all these lands, and a few weeks later, the Israelis did in fact conquer all of it. So I want to summarize what we did today. We spoke about the events leading up to the war, the refusal to accept Israel, the stockpiling of weapons, the PLO, the War of the Water, moving troops into Sinai, and closing the Straits of Tiran. So all this leads to Israel's no other choice but to declare war. They want to avoid it. They turn to other countries for help. The other countries do not help. They realize they're on their own. They create a national emergency unity government. We focused today only on Operation Moked. So imagine how many other amazing things there are to learn about the rest of the war. And we learned that within 6 hours, Israel bombed the runways and the airplanes. We spoke about the 3 coincidences: the VIP tour, the late flight, and the wrong code word. And there is no other conclusion but saying that seeing the hand of God so involved in making everything work to Israel's favor. And another question that I asked, and this is the last question that we're going to answer now, was how can we thank God for these miracles? And I think first off, knowing that these miracles occurred is a huge first step. Until I read this book, I never even knew that was a thing. I always knew what everyone knew, that the Air Force was really great on the first day, but I didn't know detailed. And like anything in life, the more you learn, the more you spend time with the person, the more you love them. The more you learn about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness, the more you love God. And the first step, which is what we did in this class, and thank you all for coming, is learning about God's miracles. If we know what he did, we can thank him for what he did. And even within whatever difficulties Israel is having now, to be grateful that the country even exists. I told my husband last night, I go, David, it's amazing that we're even alive for a day, that we're living in Israel. Wow, how incredible is that? And I think taking time, and my request to you is for everyone to just, after this class, think of something about how amazing the state of Israel is and to thank God for it, because God appreciates when we appreciate him and what he does. So I'm happy to have shared these miracles. Please share them along. And I hope to continue speaking about, I don't know if next week, maybe next year, about the 6-day war and the miracles. Thank you so much for joining, and have an amazing day.
Thank you, Adele. That was beautiful. You know, I heard that in West Point in America, they study the Israelis and their strategies and their tactics, but they can't study the 6-day war because it's a war of miracles. So they don't even bother with the 6-day war. So that's terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Adele, you wanted to give us a boost. You sent us to the moon. It was fabulous.
I'm so happy. How crazy is this story? And I never heard it before.
I never heard it either. I never heard it. I cannot believe how amazing. I mean, I always knew it was a miracle, but to hear it laid out that way was really fantastic. And I love your slides. The imagery is so fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I agree. How long does it take you to do those slides? You do an amazing job.
Thank you. It takes hours. So to plan the class takes hours, and then the slides itself, like 2 hours minimum, like plus. But you know what? First of all, I'm so happy you appreciate it. And it also helps me like focus, and like I'm on Zoom, so I want to give you more because it's not even an in-person class, but thank you all for appreciating it.
I have to tell you one thing, Adele.
Have a good Chodesh and a good Shavuos.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Adele, you in a rush?
No, not at all.
I'm going to tell you a quick thing. I was preparing a class for like high school, 8th graders. And I was going to talk about each man according to his degel, to find his purpose, to find his own degel and what he stands for and all that stuff. And one of the ideas is that what do we stand for? Because kids at that age, even at my age, I have to ask myself that question. And it's been taught that the thing that you love to do is the thing that you're best at, and that's your purpose. And I want to tell you that your class today cemented for me you waving your own magnificent flag. Every one of those slides is your flag, and I'm so happy that I remembered that Wednesdays is my time with you. I got lost along the way. I was in Florida, here, there, but I'm happy to be back and happy to see you waving your magnificent flag.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you.
it's really, really, yeah, you found your calling, and not everybody does. That's a gift in and of itself,
Yeah,
to have your direction and know where you're going.
so. And then you could imagine even more when I'm on an actual tour and I'm opening the Tanakh and like pointing out the window. I like want to cry from it.
I can't even stand it one more minute. We must get together. I must get to Israel. We have to start with that.
Yeah, yeah.
And when we do, we must get together. I need to give you a hug in person. Thank you.
I would love to.
Keep up your magnificent work. You're doing beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It means a lot.
Take care. Have a great, great day.
Bye, you too.
Bye bye.